May 7, 1915, 11 nautical miles off the coast of Ireland. A ship longer than 2 football fields is moving through calm afternoon water. It is one of the fastest, most luxurious vessels ever built. A floating hotel with Persian rugs, a Renaissance-style dining room, and 1,700 people aboard who believe, correctly, that nothing could catch them. Something is watching them from beneath the surface. At 2:10 in the afternoon, a single torpedo crosses the water in 18 seconds. 18 minutes later, the ship is gone. By the time the last lifeboat capsizes, 1,198 people will be dead, including 128 Americans who had been told in writing exactly what might happen to them. They boarded anyway. The RMS Lusitania was not just a ship, it was a statement. By 1907, Britain and Germany were locked in a naval arms race, each trying to outbuild the other in speed, size, and prestige. The British Cunard Line answered with 2 sister ships designed to be the fastest passenger vessels on Earth, the Lusitania and the Mauretania. The Lusitania could cross the Atlantic in under 5 days. It carried the newest steam turbine engines in the world, capable of pushing the 44,000-ton vessel to over 25 knots, faster than most naval warships of the era. It was, in effect, built to be uncatchable. The British government had quietly subsidized its construction, on one condition. In wartime, the ship could be requisitioned and converted for military use. It was even built with reinforced gun mounts hidden beneath its deck planking, ready to be fitted with naval artillery if needed. To the public, it was simply the most glamorous way to cross the ocean. First-class passengers dined in a 2-story Georgian-style hall beneath a domed skylight. String quartets played each evening. It was called, without irony, the Greyhound of the Seas. By 1915, that glamour had become dangerous. Europe had been at war for 9 months. Germany, unable to match Britain's surface navy, had turned to a new weapon, the U-boat. Unrestricted submarine warfare meant German submarines could sink any vessel in British waters without warning, including civilian ships, if they believed it served the war effort. In February 1915, Germany declared the seas around the British Isles a war zone. And then, in an almost unbelievable act of transparency, the German embassy in Washington took out a newspaper advertisement. It ran in 50 American newspapers on May 1, 1915, the very same day the Lusitania was scheduled to depart New York for Liverpool. The notice reminded travelers that Britain and Germany were at war, that the waters around the British Isles were a declared war zone, and that any ship flying the British flag was liable to be destroyed in those waters. It appeared directly beside Cunard's own advertisement for the Lusitania's departure. Passengers read both notices side by side. Most dismissed the warning as bluster. No one, they reasoned, would dare torpedo an unarmed passenger liner filled with civilians, least of all one carrying dozens of American citizens, from a neutral nation Germany desperately did not want to provoke. They were wrong on every count except the reasoning. The Lusitania sailed anyway, nearly full, with 1,959 people aboard, passengers and crew combined. Beneath the Atlantic, a German submarine called U-20 was already patrolling the waters off the Irish coast, commanded by Kapitänleutnant Walther Schwieger. Schwieger's orders were straightforward: sink British shipping in the war zone. He had already sunk several merchant vessels in the days before May 7th. His logbook, which survived the war and was later studied extensively by historians, shows a methodical, almost bureaucratic officer, not a man hunting for a spectacular kill. At 1:20 p.m. on May 7th, through his periscope, Schwieger spotted an enormous 4-funneled ship moving along the coastline. He recognized it immediately. There was only one ship in the world that looked like that. What happened next has been debated for over a century. The British Admiralty, specifically naval intelligence under Winston Churchill and Admiral Fisher, had been intercepting and decoding German naval signals for months through a top-secret unit known as Room 40. They knew U-20 was operating in the exact waters the Lusitania was about to cross. The ship was given only a general warning to watch for submarine activity, vague guidance, compared to the specific, actionable intelligence the Admiralty possessed. Historians still argue whether this was negligence, an oversight in a chaotic war, or something more calculated. Some have speculated the ship's loss, if it drew America into the war, might have been seen by some in British intelligence as an acceptable cost. No credible evidence has ever proven a deliberate plot. But the pattern of decisions has never fully satisfied historians on either side of the debate. At 2:10 p.m., Schwieger gave the order to fire. The torpedo struck the starboard side, just behind the bridge. The initial explosion was followed almost immediately by a second, far larger blast from deep within the hull, a detonation so severe it nearly broke the ship in two. To this day, the cause of that second explosion remains one of the great mysteries of the disaster. The official manifest listed the Lusitania's cargo as general goods, but it also listed over 4 million rounds of rifle ammunition and other war materiel, legally declared but rarely discussed publicly at the time. Germany seized on this immediately, calling it proof the ship was a legitimate military target disguised as a civilian liner. Britain insisted the cargo was incidental, and the second explosion was caused by coal dust ignition or a boiler rupture. Modern marine archaeologists who have dived the wreck still disagree on the answer. Whatever caused it, the second explosion sealed the ship's fate. The Lusitania began listing so severely, nearly 15 degrees within minutes, that half of her lifeboats on the high side swung uselessly inward, unable to be lowered, while boats on the low side dropped too fast, spilling passengers into the sea or crashing directly onto people already in the water below. There was no time for an orderly evacuation. Of the 48 lifeboats aboard, only 6 were successfully launched. 18 minutes after the torpedo struck, the Lusitania slipped beneath the surface. Survivors described the water as littered with deck chairs, luggage, and hundreds of people, many wearing life jackets incorrectly, a design flaw that caused some to flip face down and drown, unable to right themselves in the cold water. Nearby fishing boats and the few vessels willing to risk the danger began pulling survivors from the sea for hours afterward. Of the 1,959 aboard, 1,198 died. 128 of them were American citizens. The sinking became a global sensation within hours. British and American newspapers ran the story with outrage, publishing lists of the dead alongside political cartoons depicting German soldiers as murderers of women and children. The propaganda value was immense and immediate. Recruitment posters across Britain used the disaster for months afterward. In Germany, the reaction was starkly different. Newspapers celebrated the sinking as a justified strike against a ship that was, in their telling, a legitimate military target smuggling weapons under a civilian flag. A commemorative medal was even privately struck by a German medalist, satirizing Cunard for prioritizing profit over passenger safety. A medal the British government later mass-reproduced and distributed as anti-German propaganda, stripped of its original satirical intent. American public opinion, however, shifted hard against Germany. President Woodrow Wilson, who had campaigned on keeping the United States out of the European war, issued a series of strongly worded diplomatic protests. Germany, wary of provoking American entry into the war, temporarily scaled back unrestricted submarine warfare in the months that followed. But the damage to German-American relations was permanent. The Lusitania became a rallying symbol, one of the central grievances cited 2 years later, in April 1917, when the United States formally declared war on Germany, following Germany's decision to resume unrestricted submarine warfare and the discovery of the Zimmermann telegram. The sinking of a single ship on a calm afternoon off the Irish coast had helped set in motion the arrival of American soldiers on European battlefields, soldiers whose numbers and industrial support would ultimately tip the balance of the entire war. The wreck of the Lusitania still lies 11 miles off the old head of Kinsale, resting on its starboard side at a depth of 90 meters. It has been dived, photographed, and studied for decades, and the question of what truly caused that second explosion remains unresolved to this day. What is not disputed is simpler and colder than any conspiracy. A warning was published. A ship sailed regardless. A submarine was waiting. And in the time it takes to watch a single episode of television, one of the most magnificent vessels ever built vanished beneath the Atlantic, taking with it nearly 1,200 people, and pulling the world one step closer to a war that would eventually consume millions more.